Egypt's 82-year-old president is fighting for his political life tonight. For a seventh straight day, demonstrators filled the streets of Cairo, demanding that Hosni Mubarak give up the power he's held for 30 years. Mubarak named a new cabinet today and asked his new vice president to open talks with the opposition about giving them more freedom. But protest leaders met to plan the largest rally yet. They will try to put 1 million people on the streets tomorrow. And the army says it will not use force against them. The Egyptian government puts the death toll in a week of violence at nearly 100, but reports from witnesses indicate it is higher than that. An international exodus from Egypt is underway. Thousands of U.S. citizens are trying to fly out, and U.S. Marines have 2 ships standing by in the Red Sea in case they're needed to help evacuate Americans. In Washington, the Obama administration continues to call for a peaceful transition to democracy. We have extensive coverage tonight, including a team of correspondents in Cairo. We begin with Elizabeth Palmer, who has been covering the protest in the heart of Cairo. Elizabeth?
Good evening, Harry. Well, the protesters are still down in the square behind me. You may be able to hear them, several thousand of them. They've been chanting ever since quite a dramatic speech by Egypt's vice president on television a couple of hours ago, who offered talks with what he called all political forces on constitutional change. Last week, the vice president's offer might have sounded like victory for the protesters. Now, for this crowd, it's just not enough. Tell anyone who orders you to fire on us, no, the demonstrators chanted. We are your people. People who have found a voice and a place to call their own. Liberation Square has become, as one demonstrator called it, the moral heart of Egypt.
He will be here until he gets out.
The atmosphere is a mixture of jamboree, mass picnic, and religious festival. Everyone, right down to the very youngest, understands the goal. Leave Mubarak. One group of lawyers is here because, says Ayman Gawani, they are fed up with corruption in the courts.
The government not respect the people in Egypt, don't respect anything in Egypt, the law and the people.
As dusk fell, it was clear the official curfew was going to be completely ignored. The people have declared this essentially a Mubarak-free zone. Ringed by the army, the police pushed back. This is the only place in Egypt where there's true freedom of expression. It's certainly not getting any coverage on state television, which broadcasts business-as-usual pictures of the president swearing in his reshuffled cabinet. But the new ministers are all Mubarak old guard. Unacceptable to angry Egyptians demanding a fresh start. One man who wants to offer just that is Mohammed el-Baradei, Egypt's bookish Nobel Prize-winning diplomat who fought his way into Tahrir Square over the weekend to address the crowd. Change is coming, he promised them. Baradei is at home on the world stage. As the longtime head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, he was a key figure in policing Iran's nuclear program. But after decades abroad, he probably doesn't have the grassroots support necessary to lead the country. His diplomatic skills, though, may make him ideal to smooth a political transition. A transition that tonight seems more likely than ever. Now, tomorrow morning, what's being billed as the Million-Man March is supposed to take place here in Tahrir Square. And it looks to us as if the soldiers around the square have pulled back their tanks to actually make room for this tsunami of a crowd that's expected. The army reiterated once again today that it wasn't going to use violence on the protesters, so that may even encourage more people to come.
Elizabeth, this is so interesting because here you have the army siding with the people in the street. Mubarak says he's not going anywhere. This is an enormous test of wills. Is there any way to predict how this is going to turn out?
Well, Harry, this is brinksmanship of the highest order, and so far the government has blinked twice. It offered a cabinet reshuffle, and then tonight we've heard that they're offering constitutional talks. Each time there's been a concession, the protesters have picked up momentum. So I would say, the way it looks tonight, these demonstrators are holding the high cards.
Elizabeth Palmer with us in Cairo tonight. Once again, thank you. At night, it gets even more dangerous in many parts of Cairo. Over the weekend, the police were nowhere to be found, forcing civilians to form their own patrols to protect property from looters. Today, officers were back on the streets, as Mark Strassman reports.
For better or for worse, the only police force Cairo has went back to work today. Hosni Mubarak State Police. Since last Tuesday, when protesters began battling police in the streets, dozens have been killed. Police trucks torched, police stations looted. Then last Friday, the police disappeared. For 3 days, not one cop protected the city of 18 million people, twice the size of New York. Jailbreaks freed thousands of inmates. Gangs ran wild. It's widely believed some looters were police. Today, the police are back, but the fear is staying put. Last night, we found worried residents armed with bats and machetes had organized a militia with in-your-face checkpoints. They vowed to strike back against looters.
People will die to go inside. Either we die or they die.
We saw police today only on Cairo's west side, in neighborhoods like Dowie. But just 1 mile away, across the Nile, lies Liberation Square and thousands of protesters. Soldiers are here, but police seem invisible, apparently too provocative. So tonight, the checkpoints will stay up. President Mubarak today replaced the Interior Minister who oversees the state police. Not likely to mean much to people now demanding radical change. Harry?
Mark, so the cops are back out on the streets again. What real difference does it make?
During the day, Harry, very little difference because the days are relatively quiet. It's the nights where many neighborhoods in the city become scary places. So tonight's a real test for these state police. Can they reclaim some confidence of people who have thought up until now they simply can't trust the people who are paid to protect them? Harry?
Mark Strassman, also in Cairo tonight. Thank you. It is a chaotic scene at Cairo's International Airport, jammed with foreigners trying to get out of the country, including thousands of Americans. Also part of our team in Cairo tonight is Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Lara Logan. Lara?
As we flew into Cairo's International Airport tonight, Harry, we were struck by how deserted the capital looked from the air. This is a city that literally never stops, and those streets are normally packed with people and cars and bustling with activity. But tonight, because of the curfew, they looked virtually empty.
It was a dramatically different scene earlier in the day as thousands of people jammed the roads leading to the airport, desperate to get out of the country. More than 1,000 Americans made it out on charter flights arranged by the U.S. Embassy, and another 1,000 are expected to leave tomorrow. One U.S. official told CBS News tonight there was panic and fear amongst those who came to the U.S. government for help.
We felt safe but very on edge.
Crowds of people overwhelmed airline officials at Cairo's International Airport.
We can't get anybody to help us.
Here you can see the frustration of some passengers, many of whom have been stuck for days. When we arrived tonight, people were still camped in the airport, trapped by the crisis.
By the end of tomorrow, some 2,500 Americans should have been evacuated, and the U.S. Embassy says they're expecting more and more requests. But it's still only a tiny fraction of the more than 75,000 Americans living in Egypt who are registered with the U.S. Embassy, and that's just officially registered.
So, Lara, if I'm an American citizen, I'm in Cairo, I get to the airport, what is the process? How do I get out?
Americans are being told to come to the airport, to Cairo's International Airport, with their passports and basically to get in line. They really have no idea where they're going. They can't plan in advance or make arrangements. There are a number of different destinations where they could be sent, from Athens to Istanbul to Nicosia and Cyprus. Certainly for people who are living in Egypt, living in Cairo, who maybe have to get out with their whole family and really have no idea when they're going to be able to return home, this is not an easy time at all. It's a very difficult situation.
Lara Logan in Cairo. Thank you. In Washington, the Obama administration is weighing its words very carefully in this crisis. Chip Reed is at the White House with the latest. Chip, good evening.
Well, good evening, Harry. The Obama administration is walking a very fine line here. On the one hand, they strongly support the protesters, but on the other hand, the last thing they want is for Egypt to descend into chaos. So here is the basic policy position of the Obama administration right now. First, the administration is calling for, quote, an orderly transition to a government that respects the rights of the Egyptian people. Second, they are not calling on Mubarak to step down. Third, the White House is calling for free and fair elections in Egypt this fall, elections in which Mubarak may or may not be on the ballot. Now, Harry, it may seem strange that they're calling for a transition to a new kind of government, but at the same time, they're saying that Mubarak may be able to stay around. Well, the White House says they're being very adamant about this. They're saying they're not going to take sides, that on principle, they're going to continue to say it's up to the Egyptian people, not the United States, to decide who the Egyptian leader should be. Harry?
Chip Reid at the White House tonight. Thank you. The crisis in Egypt continues to affect markets around the world. Anthony Mason is our senior business correspondent. Anthony, what is going on with the price of oil?
Well, the oil jumped again today, Harry, and the crisis effectively is adding a fear premium to the price. Crude is now at a two-year high, $92 a barrel. Egypt itself is not a major oil exporter, but Egypt's Suez Canal is a key oil transit route. Nearly 2 million barrels a day are shipped through the canal, and another 1 million move through the Sumed pipeline that also runs through the country. Any disruption there would divert tankers around the southern tip of Africa, which is a much longer and more expensive route. But at this point, most analysts think that's unlikely to happen.
All right, I'll give you a hypothetical. What happens if this crisis continues and or if this crisis begins to spread?
That's the contagion fear. If this goes beyond Tunisia and Egypt and spreads to the major oil producers in the Middle East, then it could certainly have an effect on the world's economy and on our economy. That's the worst case scenario, but that could send oil prices skyrocketing, which could ultimately put the brakes on our recovery. Harry.
Anthony Mason, thank you for your expertise. The crisis in Cairo is also a threat to some of Egypt's national treasures. Soldiers have arrested about 50 men caught trying to break into the National Museum. On Friday, looters damaged 2 mummies along with 75 ancient artifacts. Experts say the artifacts can be restored and soldiers will stay there to protect against another break-in. The uprising in Egypt began online. Still ahead, why the government's decision to pull the plug on the internet may have backfired. And the assault on salt. Chances are you are eating too much of it. New federal guidelines next.